Welcome back to our channel. Hope you all are fine and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let's begin with another day of aviation miracle. Flight 327 rose through layers of golden evening light, slicing the clouds like a silver arrow. The sun hung low on the horizon, spreading a quiet glow across the cabin. Engines hummed with a steady rhythm that promised routine and safety. Inside, passengers settled into comfort-soft laughter, the rustle of magazines, the fragrance of coffee drifting down the aisle. Far behind the cockpit, in seat 14A, sat a girl whose silence carried its own gravity. 19 years old, a student of aviation, traveling home after months away. She rarely spoke, preferring the companionship of the sky itself. Every layer of cloud fascinated her. Every flicker of sunlight across the wing reminded her of why she had chosen to study flight. To her, altitude was peace, a sanctuary far above noise and expectation. At the front, the crew moved with practiced ease. Switches clicked, readings stayed steady, and the captain's calm presence filled the cockpit. His co-pilot mirrored that quiet confidence. Decades of experience had taught them that flights like this were the reward for all the turbulent ones. The world outside was painted in orange and violet. Below, the earth looked distant and still. Carts rolled down the aisles. Children played with their toys. Somewhere, an elderly man closed his eyes to rest. The aircraft floated at 35,000 feet, the perfect altitude between comfort and command. Nothing suggested that the next few minutes would test every rule of aviation and every ounce of human courage. A faint vibration rippled through the fuselage as the jet entered a higher stream of air. The passengers barely noticed. In the cockpit, a subtle unease stirred the smallest break in routine. A movement slowed, a breath grew heavy, an alert blinked for a fraction of a second before steadying again. Then came stillness, and within that stillness, something unseen began to unravel. The captain's focus wavered. The glow of instruments blurred into a haze. What had been routine seconds ago became a struggle to remain conscious. Behind the locked door, warnings flickered softly, unheard by those seated only meters away. The co-pilot reached for the controls, steadying the aircraft. But the balance of command was shifting. In the cabin, turbulence began to whisper its warning. A cup trembled on a tray. A seatbelt sign lit up. The sky, once a sheet of gold, thickened into gray. Outside, storm clouds gathered quiet at first, distant in the fading light, yet heavy enough to rattle the calm inside. The passengers sensed the change before understanding it. The smooth hum of flight grew uneven. The air felt denser, heavier. Flight attendants moved faster now, their smiles more careful, their voices softer. People exchanged uncertain glances, though no one yet knew the truth. The captain no longer held the aircraft in his command. Far below, ground control noticed minor irregularities, altitude shifts too small to alarm, yet enough to draw attention. Messages crackled through radio channels seeking confirmation that went unanswered. Inside the cockpit, the co-pilot battled both machine and fear, trying to keep control as the aircraft edged toward the bay, storm's outer ring. Meanwhile, the quiet girl in seat 14A pressed her palm against the cold window pane. She watched lightning flicker across a distant cloud. Years of studying flight simulators had trained her to recognize pattern speed variations, subtle pitch changes, pressure drops. And something about the plane's movement felt wrong. A rhythm had been broken. Her instinct told her this was no ordinary turbulence. A slight descent followed, gentle but noticeable. Gasps spread through the cabin. Overhead bins rattled. A tray of drinks toppled, spilling down the aisle. Somewhere a child cried. The attendants hurried to reassure, but their expressions betrayed what words could not hide. Fear was beginning to replace formality. The aircraft shuddered again, harder this time. The engines roared briefly, correcting themselves. The passengers clung to armrests as oxygen masks swayed faintly above them. Every second stretched longer than it should. The storm that had looked distant only minutes ago now enveloped the plane in shadow and rain. Behind the cockpit door, silence deepened. The co-pilot's breathing grew shallow. His hands, slick with sweat, began to lose strength. Instruments blinked. Altitude hold, autopilot warnings, pressure anomalies, a symphony of sounds designed to prevent disaster, now playing to an empty audience. Then came the moment no one could hear, both pilots unconscious, the aircraft continuing forward on automated control, alone in the storm. At 35,000 feet, 200 lives depended entirely on a machine and its fragile systems. The crew outside the cockpit realized, too late, that the voices guiding them from the front were gone. Confusion turned to alarm. They called for help, searched for answers, and found none. The air seemed to thin with every breath. Panic began to spread like fire. Some prayed, some shouted questions that no one could answer. The plane dipped again, not enough to fall, but enough to awaken terror. The quiet girl rose from her seat, heart pounding. Her training echoed in fragments: procedures, call signs, checklists. None of it was meant for this scale, this height, this responsibility. Yet the part of her that loved flight refused to sit still while the sky turned hostile around her. The aisles shook under her feet as she moved forward. Faces turned toward her, confused, pleading, frightened. She barely noticed. Her mind was focused only on the cockpit door ahead, where flashing lights leaked through the small seam around its frame. Every instinct screamed that someone had to take control, or the aircraft would not survive the next descent. Lightning illuminated the clouds outside, casting brief silver flashes through the windows. The world had become both beautiful and brutal, the kind of beauty that carries danger in its silence. The engines strained against crosswinds. The structure creaked. Inside that roaring chaos, one passenger kept walking. When she reached the front, the noise of alarms was clearer, sharper, urgent. The crew stood frozen, fear etched into their faces. She looked past them toward the sealed door, the threshold between survival and disaster. Her pulse matched the rhythm of the warning beeps echoing beyond it. She was 19. She had never touched the controls of a commercial jet, but she understood what those sounds meant. They were not random. They were calls for action. The plane trembled again. Somewhere behind her, people cried out as a flash of lightning split the horizon. She steadied herself, took a single breath, and stepped closer. Her expression held no confidence, only resolve. The path ahead was impossible, but the alternative was unthinkable. Above the storm, Flight 327 continued through darkness, pilotless, vulnerable, and searching for hands that could guide it home. And among the frightened hearts inside, one pair of trembling hands was ready to try. The moment the cockpit door closed behind her, the sound of chaos from the cabin faded into a heavy, mechanical hum. The air inside was colder, sharper, filled with blinking lights and rhythmic alarms. The cockpit, once a place of control and precision, now felt abandoned. The captain slumped motionless in his seat. The co-pilot, pale and weak, barely conscious. The instruments reflected red across the panels, filling the space with an eerie pulse that mirrored the crisis unfolding. Above the world, the girl's breathing trembled as she took in the sight before her by hundreds of switches, screens, levers, each demanding attention. Her hands hovered uncertainly, then steadied on the seat back. For a long second, she simply stared at the horizon through the cockpit windows. The storm ahead had grown darker, its edges flashing with electric veins of lightning. Beyond those clouds lay uncertainty. But inside this sealed chamber, the greater silence was terrifying, the silence of no one left to guide the plane. The aircraft continued on autopilot, holding altitude as programmed. Yet the warning tones grew more frequent, more insistent. Airspeed fluctuated slightly, and the first drops of rain struck the windshield with metallic rhythm. The storm had caught up with them. She glanced toward the overhead panel, the layout faintly familiar from years of studying aircraft diagrams and simulators. Her mind began to reorder the chaos into something she could process. Every sound had a meaning. Every light carried a story. The shrill alarm wasn't just noise, it was a system pleading for help. Outside the cockpit, the world had changed. The soft sunset glow had disappeared completely, replaced by deep gray clouds that wrapped around the plane like an ocean of mist. Lightning illuminated the wings in brief, blinding flashes. Each burst revealed rain sweeping across the fuselage, and each second inside felt heavier than the last. In the cabin, fear tightened its grip. Passengers held onto each other as the turbulence grew. Some prayed silently, others stared ahead in shock. The crew whispered among themselves, knowing the cockpit was sealed, waiting for a miracle that had not yet begun. Inside, the girl steadied herself in the captain's seat. Her reflection flickered faintly against the instrument panels, a small figure, surrounded by complex technology, human fragility framed by mechanical precision. Her heart pounded, but her focus sharpened. Training and instinct aligned in quiet understanding. Altitude, autopilot engagement, throttle stability, navigation alignment. She began to recognize the sequence of readings, slowly identifying what still functioned and what was beginning to fail. Lightning struck nearby, shaking the plane. The autopilot corrected automatically, pitching slightly upward to counter turbulence. The motion forced her back into the seat. Her fingers tightened around the armrest. In that moment, she realized the weight of what surrounded her. Not just the systems or warnings, but the lives behind the door she had left closed. Each sound, each tremor carried their fate. On the ground, controllers watched the aircraft's path drift subtly from its intended course. They called repeatedly, but only static returned. The signal grew faint, as if swallowed by the storm itself. Radar showed the jet maintaining altitude, but the pattern was unstable. Technicians exchanged worried glances. A line of code and blinking dots on a screen now represented 200 lives suspended in uncertainty. Back in the cockpit, oxygen masks swayed from their hooks, evidence of the pilot's collapse. The faint hiss of air filled the silence. The girl reached forward carefully, touching none of the main controls yet. Her focus was on stabilizing herself, on thinking clearly amid panic. Her mind raced through every lesson she had ever learned: pressure systems, altitude management, the importance of trusting the instruments when vision fails. Outside, rain intensified. The windshield blurred under torrents of water, wipers moving rhythmically yet barely clearing the view. Flashes of light painted the cockpit in white streaks. The sound of thunder blended with the deep vibration of the engines. Nature had surrounded them completely. A wall of chaos pressing against a shell of aluminum and faith. The aircraft descended slightly as the autopilot corrected for turbulence again. The girl's breathing quickened. She understood that even a small loss of altitude could trigger a chain of instability. Every second mattered. The silence of the unconscious pilots was louder than any storm. A haunting reminder of how fragile control could be when humanity failed and machinery carried on alone. In the cabin, the crew tried to maintain calm. The intercom buzzed faintly, its voice instructions distorted by static. Some passengers closed their eyes, unable to watch as the lights flickered. The young girl's name had begun to pass among them, a stranger-turned symbol of hope in a moment where hope was all they had left. She sat upright now, her hands resting lightly near the controls. Her face was pale but steady. The storm's reflections glowed across her features, lightning, carving streaks of light and shadow across her expression. In that moment, she was no longer just a passenger. She had become the one barrier between fear and disaster. The storm roared louder. The aircraft shuddered once more, but still held steady. Systems continued to warn. Lights continued to blink, and through it all, the quiet figure in the cockpit remained motionless, listening to the rhythm of the engines, to the voice of the machine, to the subtle cues that told her what to trust and what to fear. Far below, the world remained unaware. Cities glimmered faintly through layers of cloud. Cars moved along roads, people continued their lives, never knowing that above them, a silent drama unfolded in the darkness. A young girl sat alone in a cockpit built for two, learning to carry the weight of hundreds. She did not yet know what to do, nor how far courage could carry her. But she had already made the most important decision to try. Flight 327 moved forward into the storm, the sound of rain and machinery merging into a single tone of survival. And in that cold, glowing cockpit, hope took its first breath. The storm outside had grown merciless. Rain streaked across the windshield like liquid glass, each drop refracting flashes of distant lightning. The roar of the engines competed with the howling wind, a constant vibration that rattled both metal and bone. The Airbus shuddered under sudden gusts, tilting slightly as turbulence seized the wings. Every second felt heavier, every motion more unpredictable. Inside the cockpit, the young girl's hands gripped the yoke with trembling determination. Across from her, the co-pilot leaned forward, sweat glistening on his brow, his hands hovering over the controls as he tried to stabilize both aircraft and mind. The air was thick with tension, the kind of silence that existed only when hundreds of lives hang in fragile balance. Warning lights glowed in harsh reds and ambers, a chaotic symphony of systems alerting to minor malfunctions. That would have been inconsequential. under calm conditions. Outside, sheets of rain obscured the horizon. Lightning traced jagged veins across dark clouds, illuminating the instruments in brief, blinding bursts. The autopilot struggled to compensate for sudden shifts in wind and air pressure. The girl's mind raced through every memory of flight training, every simulation she had ever endured. She recognized patterns, the subtle pitch of the aircraft, the faint vibration of turbulence through the floor panels, the way the engines responded to throttle adjustments. She began making minute corrections, guiding the massive plane with careful, deliberate inputs, while the co-pilot whispered encouragement through strained breaths. The cabin behind them was a world of fear and hope intertwined. Passengers gripped armrests, closed eyes, whispered prayers. The flight attendants tried to maintain order, but every jolt reminded them that control had passed from seasoned pilots to a young girl with only basic flight experience on smaller planes. Yet amid the panic, a fragile thread of trust formed. They knew she was trying, and in that effort hope existed. The aircraft tilted sharply and a warning light signaled engine strain. The co-pilot reacted quickly, guiding her hands, adjusting throttle settings, but even together, they were fighting against forces far beyond their comfort. Lightning illuminated the cockpit repeatedly, painting the girl's determined face in sharp white light. Outside, the storm churned, dark clouds swelling like an angry ocean, wind tearing across the fuselage with relentless power. Her focus never wavered. Each adjustment was calculated: throttle, rudder, autopilot settings, minor corrections to prevent stalling. She learned the plane's responses in real time. Every instinct honed by hours in simulators now stretched to their limits. Sweat ran down her temple as she maintained control, her knuckles white from gripping the yoke. Behind her, the co-pilot offered precise guidance, a calming presence amid chaos. The aircraft began to descend slightly to counter turbulence, the ground far below still invisible behind a curtain of rain. Each second felt like an eternity. The storm's fury pressed in on every side, gusts twisting the wings, lightning illuminating the horizon in jagged bursts, the roar of engines almost drowned by thunder. And yet, amid this onslaught, the young girl maintained focus, a fragile anchor in a world of chaos. Every instrument told a story of survival. Altitude, airspeed, engine temperature, all shifting with the whims of the storm. She relied not only on her instincts, but also on the co-pilot's quiet guidance, coordinating each movement to keep the plane level. Passengers' lives, trapped behind seats and overhead bins, rested entirely on the precision of their efforts. The weight of responsibility was enormous, yet every heartbeat strengthened her. Resolve. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The plane pitched violently as another gust slammed the fuselage. But they held steady. The young girl adjusted the yoke. The co-pilot countered. Autopilot recalibrated. A delicate dance of life against nature's fury. Outside, the storm clouds shifted, momentarily revealing glimpses of the horizon and the lights of cities far below, tiny beacons of hope in the vast dark expanse. Lightning illuminated the cabin intermittently. Passengers, sensing the near miracle unfolding, gripped each other, whispered prayers mingling with awe. The storm raged, yet in the cockpit, a quiet determination prevailed. A synergy between training, instinct, and courage. The girl had learned the aircraft's temperament in real time, turning panic into precision, fear into control. The engines groaned under strain as a sudden downdraft hit. The co-pilot adjusted throttle and rudder settings, guiding her hands when necessary. Each minor success bolstered confidence. Each small correction averted disaster. Slowly, ever so slowly, the plane steadied. The worst of the turbulence began to subside. The storm was still relentless, but now it was no longer dictating the aircraft's motion entirely. They had taken some control back. Outside, lightning continued to crack the sky. Rain lashed against the fuselage, but the Airbus now moved with purpose. Each adjustment, each measured movement from the young girl and the co-pilot nudged them closer to stability. The flight, once a routine journey, had become a test of courage and skill. Yet within that cockpit, amidst the storm, hope shone quietly, unyielding. And in that tense, glowing, rain-streaked cockpit, two figures, one trained but faltering, one inexperienced but determined, fought together against the storm, inch by inch, moment by moment, guiding Flight 327 through the heavens toward survival. The storm had not relented. Lightning still tore across the sky, illuminating the rain-slicked fuselage. Winds battered the Airbus as it descended steadily, guided by hands both trained and unexpectedly brave. Each movement of the yoke, each adjustment of throttle, was a negotiation with nature itself, fragile, precise, and necessary. The aircraft trembled as gusts of wind threatened to tilt it sideways. Yet inside the cockpit, the young girl's resolve remained unwavering. The co-pilot, exhausted yet alert, mirrored her every move, providing a calm anchor in the chaos. Both figures, one experienced but faltering, the other inexperienced yet fearless, worked as one. Their synergy held the enormous machine steady, transforming panic into controlled motion. Every second was measured. Every adjustment mattered. The horizon was obscured by gray sheets of rain, and visibility was near zero, yet instinct, training, and courage guided each action. Below, the faint lights of a distant runway began to emerge through the downpour, a small beacon in the darkness. It seemed almost impossible to reach, yet hope anchored every hand on the controls. The plane's descent continued, instruments flickering in the alternating glow of cockpit panels and lightning, every system responding to their careful guidance. Inside the cabin, passengers sensed the climax of the ordeal. Their hands gripped seats and railings, some closing eyes in prayer, others silently watching the storm-tossed world outside. The flight attendants, though tense, moved with precision, preparing passengers for what they could not yet see. Everybody on board felt the vibration, the roar, and the weight of survival pressing down upon them. The aircraft pitched and dipped, reacting to sudden gusts and wind shears. The young girl's hands on the yoke were steady, fingers white from grip, mind sharp from focus. She adjusted the plane with precision, beyond what any ordinary passenger could manage. Every subtle correction prevented a tilt. Every small movement kept the landing trajectory alive. The co-pilot whispered reassurances to her through strained breaths, his hands guiding critical inputs while she remained the principal driver. As the runway lights grew brighter, reflected in sheets of rain across the windshield, the storm seemed to push back, as if aware of the determination inside the cockpit. Thunder rumbled far above, distant now, fading. The engines roared but obeyed every command. The plane's massive wheels, unseen yet palpable, approached the asphalt with meticulous calculation. Then the final descent began. The aircraft shuddered, tires approaching the runway, the first touch of rubber against wet asphalt sparking brief streaks of light. The landing was hard but controlled, the plane skidding slightly, yet staying upright, each second stretched impossibly long. Then finally, the Airbus slowed, braking to a complete stop. Silence replaced the storm's roar inside the cabin. Tears flowed freely. Hands clasped, hugs were shared. Cries of relief filled the space once tense with terror. The flight attendants moved through the aisles, embracing passengers, offering smiles amidst their own exhaustion. The young girl remained in the cockpit momentarily, her hands finally releasing the yoke, chest rising and falling with the weight of adrenaline and relief. The co-pilot, exhausted and grateful, turned toward her with a look of recognition and respect. The storm had tested them, pushed them to the edge, and yet the impossible had been achieved. Flight 327, once adrift in the chaos of a storm and faltering pilots, now rested safely on solid ground. Outside, emergency vehicles approached, lights cutting through the lingering mist. But no catastrophe awaited them, only the success of courage, focus, and human determination. The young girl stepped out of the cockpit, her face streaked with sweat, rain, and tears, yet illuminated by quiet pride and relief. Around her, hundreds of lives owed their survival to her courage. The storm, now receding, left a faint glow of sunlight through thinning clouds, a fragile rainbow stretching above the tarmac. Nature and fear had challenged them, yet hope had prevailed. In that moment, it was clear that heroes do not always wear uniforms or boast of experience. Sometimes they are quiet, unnoticed, and ordinary until the world requires extraordinary courage. The runway lay calm. The passengers disembarked slowly, whispers of gratitude and awe filling the air. And in that still, rain-washed morning, one young girl's quiet bravery had rewritten the outcome of a disaster, leaving behind a story of survival, determination, and hope that would never be forgotten.